Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be exploring, something that's incredibly relevant, even though it comes from an ancient text.
Okay.
The second chapter of 2Peter.
Right.
We're talking about false prophets
Mm-hmm.
and teachers
Mm-hmm.
and how to discern truth from falsehood,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to, religious teachings.
It's amazing how this issue has resonated throughout history.
Right.
It's not just a problem for the early church. It's something we grapple with constantly today.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
Right off the bat, Peter Taternady isn't mince words.
Right.
It warns that these false teachers will arise within communities,
Mm-hmm.
spreading destructive ideas that even deny the core of their faith.
Right.
And it's not just about the false teachers themselves.
Yeah.
They're going to draw people in with these teachings,
Right.
leading them down a dangerous path.
What's fascinating here is that the text doesn't shy away from the consequences.
Yeah.
It talks about swift destruction for those who spread falsehood. But it's not about a vengeful God.
Okay.
It's about the natural outcome of rejecting truth.
Right.
It's like building your house on sand. It's just not going to stand.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But why are people so easily drawn to these false teachings? Is it just about wanting to believe something that sounds good, even if it's not true?
Well, 2Peter gives us some insight into that.
Okay.
It describes these teachers as using deceptive language, appealing to our desires or weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
They offer easy solutions, bypassing the hard work of genuine growth.
So it's like that saying, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah.
They make it sound appealing, but ultimately it's harmful.
Exactly.
Right.
And think about how relevant this is today.
Oh, totally.
We're bombarded with information.
Yes.
With so many voices claiming to have the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever scrolled through your social media feed and felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting opinions and ideas?
All the time. It's like everyone's an expert these days.
Right.
So how do we sift through all that noise?
Yeah.
How do we know what to believe?
Right.
Scaly Peter gives us some pretty powerful examples of what happens when people reject truth and embrace wickedness.
Yes. The examples of the fallen angels, the flood during Noah's time, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
They're not there to scare us, but to show us the gravity of choosing falsehood over truth.
I see.
They're warnings, but also reminders that there are consequences to our choices.
I get that, but those stories can be pretty intense.
Oh, yeah.
You might feel overwhelmed by the examples of judgment.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is that there's also this message of hope woven in God's rescue of the righteous.
Right.
Noah and Lot, despite the wickedness surrounding them, were spared.
That's a key point.
Right.
It highlights that while God judges unrighteousness,
Mm-hmm.
he always provides a way out for those who seek him.
Okay.
It's about aligning yourself with truth.
Right.
And that offers a powerful protection.
So we see that God takes the issue of truth seriously.
Yes.
But let's get specific. C.T. Peter paints a pretty vivid picture of these false teachers.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the red flags we should be looking out for?
Well, the language is pretty strong.
Okay.
The text describes them as indulging in fleshly desires, despising authority, being brazen and insolent.
Wow.
It's like they have no regard for any kind of higher power or moral standard.
Fleshly desires.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit vague.
Okay.
What does that actually look like in our modern context?
Think about the things that constantly tempt us. Instant gratification.
Right.
Pursuing pleasure over responsibility, putting ourselves at the center of everything.
Right.
It's about prioritizing those desires over seeking truth and living in alignment with a higher purpose.
So it's not just about avoiding certain behaviors.
Yeah.
It's about the motivation behind them.
Oh,
It's about
yeah.
recognizing when our desires are controlling us rather than us controlling them.
Exactly.
Right.
And that ties into the other characteristic,
Okay.
despising authority.
Okay.
It's not just about rebelling against rules. It's about a deeper rejection of accountability, of submitting to something greater than ourselves.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're driven by self-interest and a desire to lead others astray.
Right.
And 2Peter also uses this interesting analogy of irrational animals
Yes.
to describe them.
Yes.
Okay.
Creatures driven purely by instinct, ultimately destined for destruction.
Right.
It's a powerful way of illustrating their lack of true understanding and the consequences of their actions.
Then there's that story about Balaam,
Yes.
the prophet who gets rebuked by a donkey.
Right.
I mean, talk about unexpected sources of wisdom.
That story is amazing.
Right.
It shows how blinded Balaam was by his own desires.
Mhm.
That even a donkey could see the truth more clearly.
Yeah.
It's humorous,
Yeah.
but also a powerful reminder that we can't always trust our own perceptions.
Right.
Sometimes truth comes from the most unexpected places.
So the story of Balaam isn't just a funny anecdote.
Right.
It reveals a key characteristic of these false teachers, their blindness to truth, even when it's staring them in the face.
And that brings us to the heart of the matter.
Okay.
The importance of discernment.
Yeah.
Of being able to distinguish between genuine truth and deceptive teachings.
Right.
We need to develop that ability to see clearly,
Okay.
to question what we hear, and to test it against a solid foundation of truth.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all of this connects.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do we develop that kind of discernment?
Right.
Stay with us as we dive deeper into that in the next part of this deep dive.
Sounds good. You know, it's interesting because 2 Peter makes it clear that these false teachers, despite their promises of freedom, are themselves enslaved to those very fleshly desires we were just talking about.
That's a good point. It's that classic trap, promising liberation while actually leading to deeper bondage.
Right.
It's like those get-rich-quick schemes that leave people in more debt than they started with.
Exactly.
But what about the people who follow these false teachers? What happens to them?
The text paints a pretty sobering picture.
Okay.
It warns that for those who have known the truth of Jesus Christ, but then turn back to the ways of the world, their situation becomes even worse than before.
That sounds really harsh. Is it saying that it's better to never know the truth at all than to know it and then reject it?
It's not about saying ignorance is bliss.
Okay.
It's about the weight of responsibility that comes with knowing the truth.
I see.
Imagine tasting pure, refreshing water after being lost in a desert, then choosing to go back to drinking muddy, contaminated water.
I see what you mean. The contrast is so stark that it makes the bad choice seem even worse.
Right.
And 2Peter uses some pretty strong imagery to get this point across.
Yes.
It talks about a dog returning to its vomit and a sow wallowing in the mire after being washed.
Those images are definitely meant to shock us, to wake us up to the reality of what's at stake. It's not about condemning people. It's about highlighting the seriousness of turning away from something pure and life-giving.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of falsehood and the consequences of following false teachers. But 2Peter isn't all doom and gloom, is it?
Absolutely not. While the chapter definitely focuses on warnings, it also highlights the importance of knowledge and discernment. It repeatedly mentions knowledge and righteousness.
So it's not just about avoiding the bad, it's about actively pursuing the good. But how do we do that? In this world of information overload, how do we know what's true and what's not?
That's where discernment comes in. And the good news is we're not left to figure it out on our own. Peter gives us tools to help us develop that discernment. It's like we've been given a map and a compass to help us navigate this tricky terrain.
So we've got the warnings, the characteristics of false teachers to watch out for, and now the encouragement to develop discernment. It's like we're being trained to be truth detectives. But what does that look like practically?
Well, think about those fleshly desires we talked about earlier. One practical step is to become more aware of those desires in our own lives. What are the things that tempt us to compromise our values, to take shortcuts, to choose the easy path over the right one?
That's a great point. It's about being honest with ourselves about recognizing our own vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
But it's not just about introspection, is it?
No, it's also about actively seeking out truth. And one of the best ways to do that is by immersing ourselves in God's Word. Not just reading it passively, but studying it diligently, meditating on its truths.
So it's like building up our immunity to falsehood by strengthening our understanding of truth. But what about all the other voices out there? The news, social media, the constant stream of opinions and perspectives. How do we filter all that?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Don't just accept everything you hear at face value. Question it. Test it against the truth you've learned from Scripture.
So we're being called to be active participants in this process of discerning truth. It's not just about passively absorbing information. It's about engaging with it, questioning it, testing it. And that sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it's worth it because the stakes are high. Choosing to believe and follow falsehood can lead us down a dangerous path. But clinging to truth, anchoring ourselves in what is real and lasting, that's what sets us free. And that freedom is what 2Peter is ultimately pointing us towards.
So it's not just about avoiding negative consequences. It's about experiencing the positive benefits of living in alignment with truth. But it's not something we do in isolation, is it? I'm guessing community plays a role here too.
Absolutely. We're not meant to do this alone. We need each other. We need communities where we can share our struggles, learn from each other's experiences, and hold each other accountable. I love that. It's like we're all in this together, helping each other navigate this complex world of truth and falsehood. And that brings me to a question for you, our listener. given what we've been discussing, what's one thing that stands out to you? What resonates with your own experience? Think about that as we continue this deep dive into the importance of discerning truth. It's so easy to just get caught up in our own little bubbles, surround ourselves with information that just confirms what we already believe.
Right.
But 2Peter challenges us to step outside of those comfort zones.
Yeah.
To be willing to have our assumptions challenged.
That's right. And that's where having a diverse community of people we trust can be so valuable.
Yes.
People who will ask us tough questions, who will point out blind spots we might not see on our own.
So it's not just about finding people who agree with us.
Right.
It's about seeking out those who can offer different perspectives, who can help us see things from a new angle.
Yeah.
It's about being open to being wrong.
Exactly. And remember, even when we disagree,
we can do so with respect and a genuine desire to understand each other's viewpoints.
Yeah.
It's about iron sharpening iron, as the saying goes.
Right.
We can help each other grow and mature in our understanding of truth.
I love that image.
Yeah.
It's like we're all part of this grand adventure of seeking truth, and we need each other to help us along the way.
Absolutely.
And it's not always easy, is it?
No.
There could be times when we get things wrong, when we fall for deceptive teachings, when we make mistakes.
Yeah.
What does 2Peter say about that?
Thankfully, the message of 2Peter isn't about being perfect.
Right.
It's about grace.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're all on a journey and we're going to stumble along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But what matters is that we keep getting back up, that we keep seeking truth, that we keep growing.
So it's not about beating ourselves up when we mess up.
Right.
It's about learning from those experiences and moving forward.
Exactly.
It's about remembering that we have a guide, a compass
Yes.
in the truth of Jesus Christ. And that truth is what ultimately sets us free.
That's the heart of it.
Right.
Even though the world can feel full of deception, the truth of Jesus Christ remains a solid anchor. It's a firm foundation we can build our lives on.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a challenge. What's one practical step you can take this week to strengthen your discernment and deepen your understanding of truth?
Maybe it's committing to a regular time of Bible study, finding a mentor who can guide you, or simply being more intentional about questioning what you hear and see.
Right.
Whatever it is, make it a priority.
That's a great challenge. And remember, we're all in this together. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your own experiences with discerning truth in a world that's constantly trying to pull us in different directions. So keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep holding on to that anchor of truth. Until next time, keep diving deep.